The evolved form of Sandshrew could simply take no more and, after several more moments of brutal assault, finally lost all remaining battle spirit. Thus, it simply lay on the ground covered in scratches, cuts and marks. Spearow showed no mercy to his downed opponent though and flew high into the air, almost up toward the cave ceiling above. Then, with a shriek of impending victory, he went rocketing back toward the ground below, glowing from the use of aerial ace, and smashed himself into Sandslash's midsection. This drove the poor ground type deep into the ground in a small crater while it released a loud cry of pain. At the same time, both Nidoran gave one last double kick, each, to the now heavily damaged and unresponsive Golbat and Arbok. Seeing their opponents were finally defeated, the two of them quickly hopped off the larger Pokémon and hurried back over to Ash's side loyally. When the thrill of battle had at last passed, all three of the Rocket Commander's Pokémon were seen laying completely unconscious on the hard, rocky ground near to each other. Zetson himself fell limply to his knees and, while all of the grunts in the cavern looked on in wide-eyed shock at what had just happened, he knelt where he was staring off into space. Impossible. I lost. He completely dominated us, we were no match. Brock and Misty simply stared, unblinkingly and in amazement, at what they had just witnessed. To see Ash and his Pokémon defeat a bunch of low-level rocket grunts was one thing, but to watch them utterly trounce a high-ranking leader of that same organization was another entirely. Even Seymour seemed impressed at what he had just seen out of the young rookie from Pallet. Wow, he completely tore that guy apart. The orange-haired girl spoke in a tone of awe but also of admiration. Brock shook his head. It was more than that. They battled for only a few minutes and Ash was in total control the entire time. That Zetson guy had no chance to barely even call out any attacks before it was over. Ash himself was just about to congratulate and thank his Pokémon for their excellent efforts when, suddenly, all three of them looked up at the same time and called out their names in a victory cry. Spearow, Nidooo, ran. And then, in that very same moment, they all began to glow and change shape. With all eyes watching them in fixation, the cavern was bathed in the white light of evolution as the victorious trio morphed, grew and turned into what they had rightfully just earned for themselves. When the bright light of evolution died down a few moments later, three larger and noticeably more powerful-looking Pokémon stood in place of Spearow and both Nidoran. Each of them wearing their newfound forms proudly and with heads held high. A strong and fierce Fearow now hovered in midair with predatory, penetrating eyes and a far larger wingspan. The Nidoran duo had also changed markedly into a larger and much more capable-looking Nidorina and Nidorino. Naturally, when he saw this, Ash grinned excitedly and immediately pulled out his Pokédex to scan his newly evolved Pokémon. Pokédex entry number 022. Fearow, the Beak Pokémon. A Pokémon that dates back many years. If it senses danger, it flies high and away, instantly. Carrying food through Fearow's territory is dangerous. It will snatch the food away from you in a flash. This Pokémon knows the moves: Fury Attack, Whirlwind, Air Cutter, Pursuit, Aerial Ace, Mirror Move, Agility, Roost and Drill Peck. Pokédex entry number 030. Nidorina, the Poison Pin Pokémon. When Nidorina are with their friends or family, they keep their barbs tucked away to prevent hurting each other. This Pokémon appears to become nervous if separated from the others. When resting deep in its burrow, its barbs always retract. This is proof that it is relaxed. This Pokémon knows the moves: Double Kick, Poison Sting, Toxic Spikes and Crunch. Pokédex entry number 033. Nidorino, the Poison Pin Pokémon. Nidorino has a horn that is harder than a diamond. If it senses a hostile presence, all the barbs on its back bristle up at once, and it challenges the foe with all its might. Its horn contains venom. If it stabs an enemy with the horn, the impact makes the poison leak out. This Pokémon knows the moves: Poison Sting, Focus Energy, Poison Jab, Double Kick, Horn Attack and Toxic Spikes. After scanning them, the young man looked proudly at his Pokémon and once again was reminded of the benefits of hard training. Most people would say that they evolved much too fast, but Ash knew that intense, challenging training and the integrated methods in which he trained his Pokémon was how and why they evolved so fast. In many ways, they quite literally needed to evolve so their bodies could handle all of the strain that their training programs put on their bodies. For Ash though, what still amazed him was the mysteries surrounding certain aspects of evolution. Namely, the way in which some Pokémon would learn one or several new moves upon evolving, like Fearow just did. Or even how sometimes they would forget certain moves they knew before evolving. Either way, he put his Pokédex away and focused on the present. "Great job guys, that was a great battle and I'm so proud of you," he called out with a smile to his 3 newly evolved Pokémon. They nodded in acknowledgement of his praise but kept their focus firmly on Team Rocket's defeated Pokémon. Ash himself became serious again and turned his attention back to the large ring of criminals around them. Zetson was still on his knees, lost in total shock and disbelief that he had lost. The rest of the grunts all now seemed scared and successfully intimidated. Dr. Zager stood up from his chair and walked out to stand in front of the rest of the fearful minions and their commander. Looking down at the shaken younger man, he scowled. "You call yourself a Team Rocket commander? You are pathetic Zetson, pathetic. Cannot even defeat a child." The old man looked at the rest of the villainous thugs in the cavern and commanded gruffly, "What are you all doing standing around? Stop that insolent little brat and his friends." The grunts all looked between each other, none of them wanting to go up against someone who had so utterly curb-stomped their commander. Zager became even more furious upon seeing this. "What are you waiting for? I told you to stop them, now. Otherwise Giovanni will hear about this." All the black-garbed men quickly shot to attention upon hearing that. As much as they might have been afraid of going up against Ash, they were even more terrified of their boss. Thus, they all drew out their Pokeballs and then released a large battalion of Pokémon that outnumbered Ash and his friends greatly. Fearow, Nidorino and Nidorina looked ready to battle again but Ash just shook his head. "I know you guys could beat all of these Pokémon but I want to end this quickly, so please return." The freshly evolved trio looked at him but finally, reluctantly, nodded and then allowed their trainer to call them back. Ash then turned to Pikachu and smiled. "All right buddy, it's your turn." Pikachu's eyes seemed to light up at that but he nodded regardless, eagerly, and then bounded down off his shoulder and stood ready to battle, cheeks sparking. He was just as calm as he was unafraid. The grunts soon ordered their Pokémon to attack and the small, powerful electric type got ready by striking a low crouching position. Ash kept his eyes locked onto the incoming horde of Rattata, Raticate, Ekans, Coughing, Zubat, Golbat and others. Brock, Misty and Seymour looked on anxiously but he remained calm. "All right Pikachu," his voice was steady and even. "Charge up Thunderbolt and integrate it with focused lightning. Make it stronger than you did earlier against that last group but don't hurt these Pokémon. It's not their fault who they're forced to serve." Pikachu nodded and began sparking his cheeks again. As he did this, his whole body started glowing bright yellow while he commenced to chanting, almost as though he were about to call upon some magical electric spell. "Pika, Pika, Pika, Pikachu." Within only seconds, an incredibly powerful and widespread thunderbolt was expelled from the yellow mouse's body and struck each and every one of the grunt's Pokémon like a bullseye on a target. All of the poor victims of the attack could only wail in agony as they were mercilessly electrocuted before, eventually, the lightning bolt exploded. When the smoke and ash of the last devastating attack cleared, it showed all of the Team Rocket Pokémon now laying on the ground, out cold and still convulsing from the high-voltage smackdown. The grunts themselves all gaped in undisguised horror and quickly returned their defeated Pokémon before slowly backing away from Ash. Zager was so enraged upon seeing this that his face turned a similar shade of purple as the shirt under his lab coat. "You are all completely hopeless. Why can you not defeat a simple child? What is wrong with you? XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX James and Meowth were staying huddled away from the ongoing commotion behind a large cluster of rocks. I think we might need to reconsider trying to steal Pikachu this time around, Jessie. The blue-haired man observed, clearly shaken from the display of raw power that Ash and his Pokémon had just displayed. She looked at her partner and nodded. Yes, that is a good idea, James. Besides, if we leave now we'll have other opportunities to steal Pikachu. Meowth suddenly spoke up as he looked at both of them. But how are we gonna get outta here without getting stopped by da rest of da team or by da twerps? As an answer to his question, James looked around and then pointed at the large drill sitting near one of the cavern walls. Maybe we can use that drill to escape, what do you think? That's brilliant, James. Jessie exclaimed as she threw the pick she was holding down onto the ground. Yeah, that's using da old noggin, Jimmy. We can tunnel through da wall. Meowth pumped a furry fist into the air. The three rockets then quickly made their way toward the drill, trying their best not to be noticed as they reached it. Meanwhile, Ash had stepped up to face Dr. Zager. Alright, that's it. You've all been beaten, now release the Pokémon you've caged and leave this mountain. His demand was fierce and left no room for rebuttal. However, the grizzled old scientist stared at the boy with anger burning in his eyes before, after a short period of silence, he finally snapped. Listen, you insolent lit. At that very same moment, a loud rumbling sound suddenly came from the farthest end of the cavern as James got the excavation drill going but lost control due to its high power and surprising speed. Because of this, when they turned their heads they saw the big machine now barreling toward them like a rampaging Raiden. Everybody get out of the way now. Ash shouted to his friends and Seymour as they all jumped out of the way of the drill with only seconds to spare. Zager and the many grunts all had to quickly scatter as well to avoid getting flattened by the digger on wheels. Although, one of the grunts had to help Zetson stumble out of the way since the badly shaken commander was still kneeling in shock. The drilling machine rolled on across the wide chamber and finally hit the farthest wall, becoming stuck in the process. James, you idiot. What are you doing? Get us out of here. Jessie demanded as she rounded on the blue-haired man panicking behind the wheel. I'm trying, Jessie, please be quiet. It's stuck and won't budge. James pleaded as he tried desperately to fix the mess he had inadvertently gotten them into. I don't care what yada, just get us outta here before they stop us. Meowth yelled, waving his arms in the air frantically. You idiot, just dig through the wall. The redhead angrily demanded. I'm trying but it won't work, the drill's jammed. The feminine man replied as he started pounding on the control console with his gloved hand. What are you imbeciles doing? Zager shouted. Get out of there right now. Ash and Misty both seemed surprised when they saw who was in the drill, with the latter voicing it. Oh come on, those three are here too. You know them? Brock asked in confusion as he looked at his friends. The messy-haired younger boy nodded. Yeah, the first time I ever ran into Team Rocket was in Viridian City. It was just those three at the time and they tried to steal a bunch of Pokémon from the center. Me and Misty managed to stop them but the Pokémon Center still ended up getting destroyed. Brock and Seymour both seemed shocked to hear this as the former pointed. Wait, you two were at the Viridian Pokémon Center when it blew up. You guys were actually involved in that. Ash nodded in reply, but at that very same moment, the drill suddenly came to life from James's repeated hitting and then lurched forward before the now rapidly rotating, powerful, massive drill bit started digging into the cavern wall. Unfortunately, the area where the machine began digging into the wall just so happened to be a weak fault line in the overall integrity of the large cavern structure. Due to this, a big crack appeared above the hole that the drill was making and quickly spread all the way up the length of the wall until it reached the ceiling. While all eyes looked on in dread below, the one lone crack quickly splintered off into several and then those evolved into increasingly large fissures. Before long, the entirety of the ceiling high above was covered in them, and that was immediately followed by the sound and feel of violent shaking. As the deep cracks and fissures in the ceiling grew and spread out, large chunks of rock and stalactites began falling to the ground below. Some were small but others were large enough that upon landing on some of the crates and other equipment belonging to Team Rocket, scattered across the cavern, it immediately crushed them. Seeing the very telling signs of an impending cave-in, Zager yelled urgently to the bumbling morons responsible for the catastrophe. Fools! Get out of there now before you bring this whole cavern down on top of us. James frantically attempted to regain control of the machine, but it wouldn't respond no matter what he tried, and that had Jesse panicking. James, turn this thing off now. It's causing a cave-in. I can't. It won't work. He whined desperately while pressing every button inside of the machine. Ash looked down at his first Pokémon quickly upon seeing this. We have to stop that thing before it does any worse damage and brings this place down faster. Pikachu, use Thunderbolt on the drill and try to short-circuit it. Pika. He nodded and then ran up to the drill before unleashing a powerful electric bolt that hit the wayward machine and immediately went to work frying its circuits. Yah! The three foolish rockets inside of the drill yelled as they were electrocuted as well. Soon, the drill began to go haywire and shook in place wildly, the chaotic motion sending the trio flying out of the machine. At the same time, the chunks of rock falling from the ceiling turned into huge slabs, which cratered and shattered the rocky ground below on impact. Oh no! I think this whole cave is going to come down. A terrified Seymour panicked. He, Ash and the other two suddenly had to jump out of the way of a particularly large chunk of rock that fell from the ceiling and landed right where they had just been standing. Dr. Zager, realizing the danger they were all in, yelled to the rest of his team. Get out of here now, you idiots, don't just stand there. This cavern is going to collapse at any minute. All of the grunts were jump-started at his words and then began running frantically for the entrance tunnel in order to save themselves from being buried alive. Even James, Jesse and Meowth quickly stood up and managed to slip away into the crowd of their fellow rocket cronies without being noticed. Then again, their fear of being buried alive made them care less whether or not they were seen. Zager himself almost went back for his computer, only for a large rock to fall down onto it, smashing it in the table it was on. No, my data, he wailed in despair with his hands in his hair. Growling angrily, he turned around to look at Zetson, who was still standing in mostly a daze. Don't just stand there, you idiot. Let's get out of here. The younger man looked up and then realized the full intent of what was going on. Eyes going wide, life returned to him as he nodded. Right, let's go. As he and the elderly scientist took off running for the exit, on the heels of the rest of their team, Ash looked at his friends. Come on guys, let's set the Pokémon in those cages free and then get out of here. Right, the other three chorused together. The four of them then took off for the cages on the other side of the cavern, dodging and avoiding falling rocks all the while. As soon as they reached them, Brock released his Graveler and then they all started working at freeing the Pokémon. It took a while, but once the powerful rock type smashed the last cage open, all of them, a multitude of Geodude, Zubat, Sandshrew and Paris, took off in a frantic stampede for the tunnel. Unfortunately for them, Zetson and Dr. Zager ended up getting blocked from following the rest of their team due to the many free Pokémon now flooding through the entrance passage and clogging up the way. Ash and his friends all headed for the exit as well, but just as the last Pokémon finally made it through, both criminals did the same and then turned around to look back at the kids and Seymour. The hateful old man gave them a spiteful and wicked glare. You may have stopped us from getting the Moonstone you brought, but now you won't live to interfere with us ever again. From his pocket, the crazy scientist pulled out a small, square device that had two switches on the front and also appeared to have explosives wrapped around it. So long, you meddlesome pests. He then shoved Zetson the rest of the way through the tunnel and followed suit himself before flipping a switch on the charge and tossing it up toward the entrance of the passage. With a loud boom, the device exploded, quickly causing the tunnel to collapse in on itself with large rocks falling and barricading the exit. Ash and his friends ran as fast as they could to try and make it before their only escape was sealed off, but, dreadfully, they were too late. The last thing they saw on the other side was Dr. Zager's smirking face as the passage became utterly blocked off, sealing them inside of the crumbling cavern. No! Ash shouted as he stopped and slammed his hands against the large, immovable boulders. It was for naught though, there was no way any of them could budge such mammoth stones, and it would even take Graveler longer to do it than they had. In his mind, he knew it couldn't end this way. He hadn't even gotten to really experience the joys of being a trainer yet. He would never win a league competition, he would never catch any more Pokémon or get closer to the ones he already had. He would never see his mother, Professor Oak or anyone else from his hometown again, and to make it worse, Brock, Misty, all their Pokémon and Seymour were also going to die with him. No. This can't happen. It can't end like this. He yelled while banging his fists continually against the closed-off tunnel. Brock and Misty could rest their hands on his shoulder while Pikachu rubbed his trainer's cheek with his own, trying to comfort him. Suddenly, however, Seymour got their attention. "Hey, look at Cleffa." Everyone turned to look where he was gesturing and saw the small fairy type on the other side of the cavern, near the farthest back wall. It was standing near a few large rocks and was motioning them over in a quick series of gestures. Confused, they all nonetheless ran over to the pink Pokémon, dodging falling rocks every step of the way. When they finally reached Cleffa, it started pointing at the large mound of rocks beside it. Cleffa. Ash was still confused, but he bent down regardless to examine the rock pile for himself. He started feeling around, touching his hands to the surface of the rough stones until suddenly, he felt a cool breeze blow against his face from somewhere beyond. His eyes immediately went wide. "Hey, I think there's another way out behind these rocks." Brock quickly got down next to him and moved in close until he could feel the breeze for himself. Once he did, his head snapped up. "You're right, Ash. But how are we supposed to get through? We'll never be able to move these rocks in time," Misty yelled in reply while looking up at the crumbling ceiling above. Brock looked over at his Graveler, whom was still out. "Leave that to us. Graveler, move these rocks out of the way as fast as you can." Grav. The sturdy rock type lifted its forearms in reply and then quickly set about to the task of moving all of the large rocks away from where they were hoping another shot at freedom resided. It didn't take long for the powerful evolved form of Geodude to finish his assigned task, and as soon as he was finished, everyone looked on anxiously at what the rock Pokémon had uncovered. There, like a shining beacon of deliverance, they saw a small little hole, just big enough for them all to fit through. Apparently, it was exactly what they hoped it was too, because Cleffa quickly went down into the small passage. Not hesitating for 1 second, Ash followed in the steps of the vanished Pokémon by taking off his backpack, getting onto his belly and looking at Pikachu, whom had jumped down off his shoulder. "You go first, Pi." The yellow mouse nodded and then scurried away quickly into the tunnel, his lightning bolt-shaped tail the last thing to disappear. Pushing his bag in after him, Ash forced himself into the hole on his stomach. Then, a few seconds later, he yelled back, "Come on guys, hurry." Misty followed suit and put her red bag in front of her before crawling into the tunnel. Brock did the same after returning Graveler. Seymour took up the rear, and just as the rubber boots on his feet disappeared into the tight passage, the ceiling of the cavern finally collapsed entirely. They could all hear the sounds of what resembled an avalanche happening behind them as the large cavern was permanently sealed off by the complete cave-in. They knew they were now trapped inside of the small tunnel with no hope of turning back. All they could do was force themselves onward, wherever it may lead, and hope it lead to freedom. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX They were literally dragging themselves along the rocky, rough ground on their bellies as the tunnel curved, twisted and turned in a complex, unpredictable pattern. Since the space was so tight, Ash and his two friends had to push their packs ahead of them every foot or two before they themselves could move on. The tunnel itself was pitch black without the artificial lights that Team Rocket had strewn throughout much of the mountain they had traversed thus far. Totally blind, all they could do was move slowly and carefully, trying to stay close to one another by making sure their packs stayed in constant contact with the feet of whoever was in front of them. Seymour, however, simply made sure he could touch Brock's shoes. Since Cleffa was in the lead, Pikachu remained close to the other Pokémon by using his much keener sense of hearing to keep track of it. To do his own part in helping, the electric type would occasionally spark his cheeks so that Ash could see him and know they were still heading in the right direction. The air was cool in the winding passage, but they could still smell fresh air, and that was reassuring. Eventually, they came to a total halt. Ash couldn't see what Cleffa was doing since they were in pitch darkness, but he could hear movement, and before long, Pikachu sparked his cheeks again to once more give light. With this, the messy-haired boy saw both small Pokémon now sitting by his head, and he could just barely discern Cleffa pointing ahead and then making what seemed to be punching gestures. Reaching out, he felt around in front of him and made contact with a moist, solid rock wall that signaled a dead end. He very nearly panicked until, Pikachu still sparking his cheeks for light, he saw Cleffa still making those same punching gestures at the wall. Not understanding but willing to do anything to get out of such confining spaces, he reared back his right arm and thrust his fist toward the wall, fully expecting pain to erupt as soon as he struck the solid rock. However, instead of bone-shattering pain, he felt his arm go straight forward through the wall and into loose dirt. Surprised, he reached his other hand out and began scraping and pulling at the wall until, finally, the loose dirt and rocks gave way and a small opening was revealed. Squinting his eyes due to light hitting them and dispelling the thick darkness, Ash regained his sense of sight before pushing his pack through the newly made hole after Pikachu and Cleffa, who ran out of the tight passage eagerly. He just as enthusiastically followed suit, his friends following close behind, until they finally came out into a marvelously wonderful open space. When Ash stood up and looked around, he noticed that they were now standing in a much larger tunnel that went in two different directions, one to the right and one to the left. Looking back to where they came from, he was surprised to see that it was nothing more than a small hole in the wall. A wall in which appeared to have less solid places here and there, explaining how he had managed to punch a hole through it. "Wow!" Misty exclaimed in surprise as she and the other two stood up and adjusted to their surroundings. "Where are we now? This tunnel looks different than the others." "I don't know," answered Professor Oak's student, who was in question himself while looking up at the roof of the wide, high and round passage. "It's weird that there's light in this area of the mountain when I don't see any of the artificial lights Team Rocket strung up back where we came from." That is strange," Brock agreed while putting his pack back onto his shoulders. "It's totally bright in here but I don't see any lights anywhere." Seymour, for his part, was examining the walls of the new tunnel and hummed while adjusting his big-rimmed glasses. "This tunnel is definitely much different than any of the others I have ever seen here in MT. Moon. The mineral deposits in these walls are visible to the naked eye and the composition of the dirt is quite rich." He reached down and ran his hand through some loose dirt on the ground near the wall. "I can tell just by the feel." Suddenly, Cleffa called out to them from the tunnel that veered off to the left, gesturing at the same time for them to follow. Ash and his friends resituated their packs onto their shoulders and did as the little Pokémon bayed, walking after it as Cleffa bounced down the passageway. As they trekked along the path that wove smoothly through the mountain's interior, they soon got the feeling that they were going up at a slight incline. After a few minutes of the gradual ascent, the tunnel leveled out again and then stopped. To their great displeasure, however, they eventually found a huge boulder blocking their way. "Great, how are we gonna get past this?" Misty gestured and sighed. "We came all this way only to hit a dead end. No offense Ash, but I'm pretty certain you won't be able to punch your way through this one." Undeterred, Cleffa bounced over and then hopped right in front of the boulder, calling out in a loud voice as she stopped. "Clef Cleffa Clef! Clef Cleffa!" Ash and the others watched in amazement as, after only a few moments of waiting, the large boulder suddenly started rolling to the side and eventually came to a stop with a loud thudding noise. Beyond that there was now a large opening revealed, and standing on the other side of the high arched, stone entryway were two Clefairy with their fingers pointed up in the air. "Clefairy!" Seymour exclaimed excitedly while pointing at the two newly appeared Pokémon. "Two real-life Clefairy! Oh wow!" Cleffa bounced up to both of its evolved forms and then began speaking in a reasonably fast speed while gesturing at the four humans and Pikachu. The Clefairy, after being reassured about their outsider guests, nodded in understanding and smiled. Cleffa smiled as well upon seeing this and then looked back to Ash and the others before gesturing that they should follow once more. Not willing to go against direct commands from the mysterious little pink Pokémon, the three trainers and once scientist, plus Pikachu, followed after Cleffa and the Clefairy for some time down the long, winding passage. After several minutes of this, they saw yet another opening ahead, but this time with bright light shining from it. As soon as they reached the exit and passed through it, all of their jaws almost dropped to the ground at the sight awaiting them. They were now standing in a wide open, fairly sizable cavern that had a hole up in the ceiling, which allowed light to shine down into the chamber. Or at least in this case, moonlight, since it was clear by the starry night sky and full moon above that darkness had fallen outside over the mountain. There were Cleffa, Clefairy and even a few Clefable gathered all around the cavern, interacting with each other, dancing together and even playing in some cases. But what drew the attention of the group more than anything else was that which all the fairy Pokémon were congregating around the most. The object that caught in full transfixion the gazes of all who beheld it. In the center of the chamber, situated on a flat slab of solid stone, was a huge and majestic-looking rock. One that seemed in appearance to be very much like a meteorite but also a far larger version of the much smaller moonstones, which a fortunate soul could occasionally find if they were lucky enough. The rock itself radiated a kind of cosmic, mysterious aura that was so brilliant, it almost glowed blue in the descending moonlight that it was bathed in. On top of the monolithic stone was a covering of bright green, healthy-looking moss, and all around its base in a ring, resting on the slab of granite beneath it, were numerous regular-sized moonstones. Seymour, eyes wide and mouth agape, stumbled forward. TDM Moonstone. A big grin soon took up residence on his entire face as his shock gave way to excitement, hands balled up into shaking fists at his chest. It's actually here. I can't believe I've finally found it. Yes. Woohoo. While the ecstatic scientist danced around like a fool in celebration, Ash and his friends stared at the space rock with undisguised awe and amazement. Misty was the first to say anything at all, and when she did, her tone came out in a breathy whisper. It's so beautiful. It sure is. Brock nodded in agreement as he too stared transfixed at the almost glowing rock. Ash, after tearing his eyes away from it, walked up to Cleffa and smiled. Wow Cleffa, thank you so much for saving us and then bringing us here to see this, it's totally amazing. Pikachu pie. Pikachu chirped in agreement to the small little fairy type. Cleffa, eyes smiling happily, nodded to the words of gratitude and voiced it with a cheerful, Cleffa. Suddenly however, one of the Clefable noticed their unexpected visitors and then blinked in surprise before giving a cry of, Clefable, to its companions. As soon as this happened, all of the Cleffa quickly hopped away to hide behind a few Clefairy and Clefable while the rest all flanked behind the biggest of the latter and then moved in to swiftly surround the humans. As soon as they had the perceived intruders boxed in, the lead Clefable glared at them and seemed none too happy at having humans in their midst. Then, shooting a sharp stare at Cleffa, the apparent head of the group pointed and shook a finger while speaking in a harsh, chastising tone to the younger Pokémon. Cleffa, however, shook its head rapidly and then started speaking fast to Clefable and all the others in an attempt to explain what was going on. All the while, it told the story of what had recently happened concerning Team Rocket, gesturing at Ash and the others intently as the determined little fairy type tried to convince its kin that they were not dangerous. Ash himself just looked at the others and then nodded before walking up to the wild, rare group of Pokémon. Close but not too close, he knelt down in front of them and held his hands up unthreateningly while Clefable and the others with it studied him with a wary eye. Smiling, he spoke in a soft, calm voice. Listen all of you, I promise that none of us are here to harm you or take your Moonstone. We actually just finished fighting off a bad group of people who did want to steal it, and all of you as well. I promise, we're your friends. Pikachu even helped by waving his small arms as he jumped down next to Cleffa. Pikachu pie. Pikachu pie pie Pikachu pie. Pikachu pie, Pikachu. Clefable considered what Ash said for a long moment and then looked to Cleffa for confirmation. The small Pokémon nodded vigorously, showing that it was indeed the truth. Having its mind put at ease, Clefable smiled and patted Cleffa comfortingly before turning to Ash and his friends. Then, extending a friendly gesture toward them, it nodded. Cleffa Clef, Clefable Clef Clef Clefable. The 10-year-old took the nod as Clefable's way of thanking them for all they had done to protect them. In reply, he only smiled. "No need to thank us, Clefable, it was our pleasure to help you and we would do it again." He then held out his hand and Clefable took it, shaking it with its own hand in a sign of friendship and goodwill. Clefable. At that same moment, all of the fairy Pokémon in the cave started to become excited. Ash and his friend looked toward the source of what was causing their sudden excitement and noticed that the Moonstone had begun glowing in a very noticeable bright blue color. The air itself seemed to radiate with some kind of mysterious energy, and the moonlight that was bathing the cave in its light appeared to take on a blue shade itself. "What's going on?" Misty asked as she looked around and felt bumps appear on her skin from the invisible energy that was charging the atmosphere. "I think this is the power of the Moonstone. We're about to see it firsthand," Seymour exclaimed excitedly. As the group watched the strange event unfold before them, several of the Clefairy began doing a unique hopping, twisting and spinning dance routine around the Moonstone, each one perfectly in sync with the other. As they did this, the Cleffa and Clefable in the cave stood on the outside of the dancing circle like it were a ritual taking place. One by one, each Clefairy would end their dance by reaching up and touching the glowing Moonstone. Immediately upon doing so, all of the ones who touched it would begin glowing and changing shape as they evolved into Clefable themselves. Ash, amazed at what he was seeing, took off his backpack and then pulled out his researcher journal before furiously beginning to scribble notes down into it. As he wrote, he looked back and forth, from the evolving Clefairy to his journal again, and recorded every second of what he saw. By the time the ritual was finally over, half of the Clefairy in the cave had evolved into Clefable. Ash and his friends just continued to stare in awe at what they had just seen while Seymour broke the silence with a loud shout. "That was amazing. After all of these years spent looking for Clefairy and the Moonstone, my journey is finally complete. I actually got to see the power of the Moonstone for myself. This is great. With a power like that, it's no wonder Team Rocket wanted to steal the Moonstone," Brock commented thoughtfully with a hand to his chin. "Yeah, can you imagine if they would have gotten their hands on this thing? That would have been horrible." Misty shivered at the thoughts of what could have been. The squinty-eyed teen nodded. "Especially since the smaller Moonstones can also be used to make other types of Pokémon evolve as well. I would imagine this big one can do the same thing. Well, they didn't get it and they never will." Ash put his journal away and stood back up, though he did not put his pack on yet. "Those three idiots made sure of that when they brought the chamber down that lead here. I just hope Team Rocket got spooked enough from this that they don't try anything here again. Remember that other tunnel we saw before Cleffa brought us here to the Moonstone? I don't know where that leads and I hope they never do either." His friends nodded in agreement as Seymour turned to them and spoke. "You know, I think I might know why these tunnels in particular have light whereas the ones in other areas of the mountains do not." Seeing that he had an intrigued audience, he went on. "The Moonstone gives off a very bright glow, and as we saw before the Clefairy's ritual, it somehow has a connection to the moon itself. I think it somehow absorbs lunar light from the hole in the ceiling above." He gestured to the large gap in question that showed the night sky outside. "And then filters that light through the tunnels that are closest to it." The three young trainers seemed surprised to hear that, but it was Misty who spoke. "What kind of connection does the Moonstone actually have to the moon though, I wonder?" Seymour smiled and raised his finger. "Well, as I told you earlier, it has always been my theory that the Clefairy species came to this planet from space, specifically from the moon." His listeners went wide in the eyes hearing that, and all three spoke at the same time, now more willing to believe his seemingly crazy ideas than before. "From the moon?" He nodded eagerly and turned to gesture at the fairy types in the cave. "That's my theory at least, yes. Clefairy are found in many different parts of the world and in many different regions. I think they were the ones who originally brought many of the smaller Moonstones to our world and left them scattered all over. Then, at some point after that, other species of Pokémon found they could interact with the Moonstone and evolve as well." With the kids hanging onto his every word, the over-exuberant scientist continued. "I believe there are still Clefairy and the other members of their evolutionary line on the moon, perhaps along with other types of Pokémon. And I also believe they still send smaller moonstones to Earth for their cousins who live here. But above all, I am inclined to believe that this big moonstone and all of Mt. Moon itself is where the race of Clefairy on this planet first began. But how though? Ash finally asked as he broke their silence. How do you think they came here? Seymour gestured at the moonstone itself. I'm not sure exactly, but maybe their ancestors originally came here in the moonstone itself, somehow, and then dispersed throughout the world from here after that. But either way, all of these questions and more are why I have decided to make a decision. He then held out his arms and grinned excitedly. I am going to stay here with the Clefairy and study the moonstone some more. I've never really fit in anywhere else, and life behind a stuffy old desk at the museum just didn't suit me. I think my place is here. Ash seemed a little surprised at first, but then gave an encouraging smile. Well then, Seymour, I wish you the best. Brock and Misty nodded in agreement, but before they could say anything, the head Clefable walked up to Ash while holding 3 normal-sized moonstones in its hands, which had been taken from beneath the big one. Clefable. The tiny winged, pink Pokémon held the stones out to Ash, and he looked at them in a mixture of surprise and confusion. For me. He pointed at himself for emphasis, and the evolved form of Clefairy nodded. Clefable. After overcoming his shock at the very kind gesture of what must have been gratitude, he took the trio of small space rocks and smiled. Thank you, Clefable, I really appreciate this. The leader of the Mt. Moon Clefairy Eye smiled in reply, but then had its attention drawn to Cleffa, whom was poking at the bigger Pokémon. While Ash put the moonstones away into his pack, he watched as Cleffa spoke with its leader in what appeared to be an imploring manner. Clefable listened to its smaller kin and then looked over at Ash before turning its attention back to Cleffa. After a few moments, the evolved form of Clefairy smiled and gave small nod. This caused the smaller Pokémon to jump into the air happily before hopping over to the boy who had been the subject of conversation. Animatedly, Cleffa began talking to him while making gestures that he didn't necessarily understand. However, in order to really drive the point home, the little pink Pokémon started pointing at the Pokéballs that hung on the cloth belt around his waist. It was only at that point did he finally understand what the tiny fairy type was trying to say. Are you trying to say that you want to come with us, Cleffa? He gestured at himself to make sure there were no misunderstandings. The Mt. Moon native nodded vigorously and started to chant of its eager desire while hopping up and down. Cleffa. The flattered young man smiled as his guess was rewarded with a very enthusiastic reply, but, just then, he also remembered a promise he had earlier made and turned to the passionate Clefairy lover. Hey Seymour, I know we told you earlier that we wouldn't capture any of the Clefairy while we were here, but... He didn't get to finish though because the eccentric scientist just held his hand up. Cleffa wants to go with you, Ash. I don't have a problem with that at all. If anyone will take care of it, I know that someone is you, my friend. The young rookie nodded in gratitude to the stubble-faced man and then reached for one of his empty Pokeballs. Enlarging it, he knelt down and smiled. All right then, Cleffa, welcome to the team. No sooner than those words were spoken and Cleffa smiled joyfully while bouncing up and down again to show its happiness. Feeling giddy at the thought of catching such a rare Pokémon, he touched the ball to its gently head and then watched as Cleffa was sucked inside of it swiftly. From there, the ball didn't even shake once before dinging with a burst of bright stars to signify a successful capture. Looking at the ball fondly, Ash turned his attention to Pikachu and the rest of his friends while smiling with pure enthusiasm that was contagious. This is one more for the team, you guys. Pikachu cheered and jumped back onto his trainer's shoulder with an equally excitable, Pika. While Brock, Misty and Seymour congratulated him on the newest addition to his ever-expanding roster. Even the other Clefairy and Clefable cheered for them as he let Cleffa out of the ball and held it in his arms. Smiling at his brand new Pokémon while the adorable little fairy type smiled back at him, Ash chuckled. Well, it looks like you'll be coming to see the world with us, Cleffa. Ice-milling, the willingly captured Pokémon waved its small arms around and cheered, Cleffa. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX Since it was so late by the time all of the day's events were settled, Ash and his friends decided to stay with the Cleffa and Seymour in Mt. Moon. Thus, under the light of the full moon in the cavern of the Moonstone, the three young trainers slept comfortably on the ground, tucked in their sleeping bags, while all of the Cleffa evolutionary line slept around them. Seymour had already made himself at home right in the midst of the gentle-natured fairy types and slept among them like one of their own. The next morning, like an honorable procession, all of the Cleffa in Mt. Moon lead Ash and his friends, with Seymour in tow, out of the mountain. Interestingly enough, they had been taken back to the tunnel with the small hole, which had served as their saving grace the day before. From there, Cleffa took them down the passage that veered off to the right, which Ash had been curious about ever since seeing it. His curiosity was soon answered since the passage in question ended up taking them down several twisting turns, side chambers and maze-like passages until they finally came to a solid rock wall. Showing that all was not always as it seemed, however, Cleffa and a few other Cleffa started to wag their fingers back and forth until a blue glow surrounded the wall. Then, to the amazement of the humans watching, the seemingly impassable barrier started to shift and move to the left, revealing that it hadn't really been a wall at all but a very large boulder. When they stepped out into the new passageway beyond, their eyes were greeted to the welcoming sight of daylight shining outside of what must have been the exit of Mt. Moon. Seymour seemed quite surprised as he looked around and saw that they had come out into yet another tunnel, this one bigger and less rugged looking. Moreover, the one end of the passage that led away from the exit of the mountain went straight on for some ways before veering around a corner and disappearing into darkness. Looking up, the admittedly odd scientist saw the lights that Team Rocket had strung up on the ceiling, though they were no longer active. His eyes widened a little when he saw this and he looked back at Ash and the others before commenting. "I know where we are now." The kids turned to him and he held up a finger. "This tunnel will eventually take you back to that fork where we started following Cleffa yesterday. This passage we are in now serves as the main path through the mountain. The tunnel system that the Cleffa just brought us through intersects with this one, but since the entrance to it was hidden I never knew about it." Fascinating. Ash and his friends smiled in amusement at his excitement over something so small, but Misty turned toward the light at the end of the literal tunnel. "That's great and everything, but I'm ready to get out into daylight." The others agreed, and before long, all of them were standing outside of Mt. Moon on a ledge that overlooked the sprawling countryside laying before them. From the current vantage point, they could barely make out what seemed like the buildings of a town far in the distance. Brock pointed when he saw this. "See that? Those buildings in the distance are Cerulean City. We should be there by this afternoon." Misty seemed to tense up a little at the mention, but she regained control rather quickly as Ash turned back around to face the host of fairy Pokémon and Seymour. Smiling, he held his hand out to the lab coat-wearing man. "Well, Seymour, I hope you're happy here and find out as much as you can about the Moonstone." Brock gave a small chuckle. "Yeah, and if you ever actually manage to prove any of those theories and write a book about it, I'll be the first one to read it. And make sure you help look after all the Cleffa and their family," Misty added as she smiled and looked down at all of the cute little fairy types. Nodding, the odd but kind man looked fondly upon the three friends. "I will, and thank you all for everything you did in helping to run Team Rocket out of the mountain. Myself and the Pokémon who live here all owe you a very big debt, and I wish you nothing but the best on your journey." After that, Ash looked down at Cleffa, who was standing next to him. "It's time to go, Cleffa. Wanna say your goodbyes?" The little pink Pokémon nodded up at him and then bounced over to start saying farewell to her kin. After a short time of sharing their final goodbyes, Cleffa went to Cleffa last. The two of them spoke a few words to each other, and then afterward, the larger of the two looked at Ash. Understanding the unspoken words, he smiled and nodded. "Don't you worry, Cleffa, I'll make sure to take really good care of Cleffa." The evolved form of Cleffa smiled at him and nodded in return while Cleffa hopped back to its new trainer and up into his arms. Then, with their farewells all said, the three young travelers began walking down the slope that led to the road some ways below. A very well-maintained road that led all the way to Cerulean City and beyond. As they reached the grassy path down on the flat land, their footsteps began carrying them away from Mt. Moon. Looking back, they saw Seymour and all the fairy Pokémon still standing on the ledge near the entrance to the mountain, and all of them were waving goodbye. Turning around a little bit, Ash and his friends waved back and each of them yelled a few parting words, even Pikachu and Cleffa. Bye. See ya again someday. You all take care of each other. We hope to see you again one day. Pikachu Pie Pikachu. Cleffa Clef. While all the Pokémon with him returned the favor in kind with their own chants and calls, Seymour smiled and yelled out, "Goodbye my friends. Take care." Thus, with that part of their journey behind them, Ash and his friends turned their attention to the road ahead and Cerulean City in the distance. After traveling for much of the morning, the group of three stopped by the road at around 11 and prepared to have an early lunch. While Brock prepared food for them all and the Pokémon, Ash himself let his own out so they could have their daily training session. He did his own workout for a while, and then once he was done, the sweaty and satisfied young man walked over and sat down near their camping area. "Alright Cleffa, come on over here," he called out to his newest Pokémon, whom had been watching the rest of his team train while sitting with Misty. Cleffa, came her eager reply while bouncing over to him. Smiling at her enthusiasm, he grabbed his Pokédex from on top of his pack and then pointed it at Cleffa. A few seconds later he finished scanning the small fairy type and then listened to the readout for the information. Fortunately, since Cleffa was the pre-evolved form of Clefairy, his standard region-locked Pokédex had information on it. Though he did wish that he could at some point get an actual international Pokédex. Pokédex entry number 173. Cleffa, the star-shaped Pokémon. According to local rumors, Cleffa are often seen in places where shooting stars have fallen. Because of its unusual, star-like silhouette, people believe that it came here on a meteor. This Cleffa has the abilities Cute Charm, Magic Guard and Friend Guard. This Pokémon is female and knows the moves Pound, Sing, Sweet Kiss, Copycat and Magical Leaf. After Dexter finished reading out the information on his newest Pokémon, Ash hummed and tapped his lip. "Well, let's see, I think those are all the moves you can learn right now before you evolve, but let me check just to make sure." He then manually looked back through the entry for Cleffa and glossed over her moveset. After a few seconds he nodded and looked back down at her. "Yeah, that's it until you evolve into Clefairy." So, putting his Pokédex away, he put a hand on his knee and drummed his fingers upon it. "What I think we're gonna do is work on your physical abilities and start practicing on improving and strengthening the moves you already know. You ready Cleffa? It won't be easy training, but it will make you stronger. A lot stronger." The small little fairy type nodded firmly and raised her tiny arms up. Clef. With that, the two of them went to start her new training regimen. For Ash, it was a little difficult getting a system in place that would work for such a small Pokémon that had no otherwise markable talents in strength or power. From what Professor Oak had told him about Clefairy and their evolutionary line, their strengths were in evasiveness and in the special energy attacks that they could use. Namely of the psychic and fairy type variety. While he wanted to improve upon the attributes that Cleffa could naturally become adept at, he wanted to do the same thing with her as he did all of his other Pokémon. Which was, essentially, to hone their weaknesses and turn those aspects into strengths. For Cleffa, this meant building upon her strength and power, as well as other attributes, so that she would become well-rounded. To do this, he put her on the same standard physical training program that his other Pokémon followed, only individualized for her own unique needs. First he had her do a series of fast hops and jumps from one end of the road to the next, about 50 yards, while wearing a weighted body harness he had picked out for her. After that, she would do the same thing again, only this time she would try running on her feet, which her species were not overly skilled at. Next he had her practicing full-body tackles and slams against a nearby tree. This was designed to improve upon her durability, endurance, power and strength. From there he had her try jumping as high into the air as she could while weighted down by the harness. This was also designed to improve upon her explosive power, stamina and leg strength. Lastly, he had her work at sparring with Pikachu and the others so as to practice honing her moves. Since she only knew Pound, Sweet Kiss, Copycat, Sing and Magical Leaf, it wasn't too tall of an order. She was able to drill on Pound and Magical Leaf by both sparring and using targets. She would use nearby rocks and trees to do Pound on, and the same could be said with Magical Leaf. Only, to practice accuracy, Ash had her try to hit the speedy Pikachu to improve her aim. Even though Magical Leaf almost always hit its target anyway. Sweet Kiss was the same. It was a move that was easy to miss, so he had her work on using it as many times as she could to try and hit fast-moving targets like, again, Pikachu. Copycat was similarly used, albeit to somewhat humorous effect since seeing her use moves like Thunderbolt and Quick Attack were quite interesting. This was mostly because she was unprepared for the power and force of such attacks and would lose control each time. Seeing Pikachu run from an out-of-control bolt of lightning, with wide eyes, caused Ash and his friends to enjoy a good chuckle or two. Especially when he had to pick up his tail and run on both back feet just to keep from getting his backside zapped. Admittedly, it would not have hurt him very much getting hit with an electrical attack, but regardless, the spectacle was still rather funny. Sing was the only attack Ash could see that would take Cleffa quite a bit of practice to master. The only way a Pokémon could use Sing and not put everyone to sleep who heard it was to learn how to control and direct the notes that were sung. Cleffa tried it one time on Nidorino but accidentally put all of them to sleep in the process. Needless to say, when Brock woke to find his stew almost burned several minutes later, he wasn't amused. Ash had decided then and there that, in the future, he would take Cleffa away from camp with whoever her sparring buddy was so that she couldn't accidentally put anyone else to sleep while practicing. He also made a mental note to warn Professor Oak about the dangers of her practicing Sing anytime she was training at the lab. Overall, her first round of training went quite well. Though she was exhausted by the end of the hour, Ash was pleasantly surprised at the heart she showed. He would have assumed her to be naturally soft and weak because of her species, but there was more to the small star-shaped Pokémon than met the eye. She had heart and determination, and that would take her farther than natural toughness and grit ever could. When they were all done with their workouts for the day, Ash sat down with a sigh next to Misty and enjoyed the delicious herb stew that Brock had prepared. As he slurped the light and creamy meal, the amber-eyed boy watched all of his Pokémon eagerly dig into their own food as they ate with the ones belonging to Brock and Misty. Specifically, Beedrill, Butterfree, Nidorino and Nidorina seemed to be the most famished. Not only were their bodies still adjusting to their recent evolution a day prior, but Ash had increased and adjusted the intensity of their training regimens to suit their new forms. For the Nido pair, he had simply increased the overall intensity and challenging quality of their existing routines. Outside of a few tweaks here and there, most of what they did was able to stay the same. Only now they had new moves to work on, more power available to their larger bodies, and the weight on their training harnesses had been decently increased. When they first decided to sit down and break for lunch, Ash had used his Pokédex to send Fearow away to the lab, and, since that left only Pikachu, Nidorina, Nidorino and Cleffa on his team, he requested for Butterfree and Beedrill to get sent back to him. Even though Fearow and Raticate were also newly evolved, he knew that they would be able to get by with their current training regimens without much difficulty. Beedrill and Butterfree were different though. Since neither one of them were used to having wings, Ash had to completely restructure their training regimen, and once they were returned to him, it took a portion of their 2-hour break just getting both of them squared away. Almost as much as it did for Cleffa. While the intensity and main focal points of their training remained the same, he had needed to set both bug types up on a more modified routine that made use of their new flying capabilities as well. They still wore their body weights, like all the rest, but they now also did an individualized version of the aerial training techniques that Fearow and Pidgeotto did. Ash wanted to strengthen their wings now as well, not merely their fragile insect bodies. Butterfree and Beedrill also had a plethora of new moves to improve upon, as well as a few other aspects of their general physical capabilities that could be strengthened. All in all, they, like Cleffa, had adjusted well, and he knew that in time, their new training regimens would come to pay off dividends. It was with that thought in mind that, as he ate, Ash decided to make a call to the lab with his X-transceiver. After several rings, the screen came to life and showed Professor Oak sitting at his video phone. And from the background, he was apparently using the phone that was in the main ground floor research area of the lab. "Hey Professor." The boy greeted with a smile and a wave. "How are you?" The older man smiled as well when he saw who it was. "Ash, what a nice surprise." "I'm doing quite well, thank you for asking. How about yourself? I trust things are going well for you." His student nodded, the air of positivity around him being palpable. "Yeah, it is. Me and my Pokémon won a Boulder badge at the Pewter City gym, and then Brock, the gym leader, decided to come with us. He's a really great guy and a super cook. He's also great with Pokémon and wants to be a breeder." He then turned his wrist around so that the camera of his X-transceiver was pointing toward Brock, whom was eating across from he and Misty. "This is him, Professor." The teenager smiled and waved the hand holding his spoon. "Hey Professor Oak, it's an honor to meet you. Ash has talked about you a lot. I can't tell you how much I respect your theories and opinions on Pokémon." The gray-haired man nodded and smiled kindly. "Well, thank you Brock, always nice to meet an admirer. It's nice to hear you are traveling with Ash, and I wish you luck on your endeavors to become a Pokémon breeder." Ash then turned his device toward Misty beside of him. "And I can't remember if you've gotten to talk to her yet like Mom did, but this is Misty, another friend of mine. She's traveling with me too, and she wants to be a water Pokémon master." The orange-haired girl in question smiled nervously at the screen on Ash's wrist and greeted politely. "Hello Professor Oak, it's so great getting to talk to you. I've seen some of your lectures about water Pokémon on that educational show you have, and I think they were absolutely amazing." The grandfather of Gary Oak simply chuckled in good-natured amusement. "Well, thank you Misty. As I told Brock, it is always very rewarding getting to meet a fan. I hope to get to meet both of you sometime with Ash. Keep shooting for that dream of yours." After directing the camera back to him and off Misty's now bright red face, Ash smiled into it. "So yeah, we just came through Mt. Moon and are on our way to Cerulean City. We stopped for lunch though, and I took that time for me and my Pokémon to train. You already know Spearow evolved since I just sent him to you earlier, but my Nidoran duo did as well. I also caught a new Pokémon, a Cleffa." The smoothly shaven researcher smiled proudly at his pupil. "Really now? A Cleffa you say? That is quite a rare catch indeed my boy, you rarely see Clefairy in Mt. Moon, let alone Cleffa. And I am very glad to hear your Pokémon evolved Ash, no doubt your diligence in training sped up the process greatly." He held up a hand. "So far most of the Pokémon you've caught have already evolved at least once, and you have captured a fair few. So far you have 5 Pokémon with me here at the lab, and that is an accomplishment my boy." Ash sheepishly rubbed the back of his head. "Thanks Professor, but I actually called for a reason. I need to keep all the Pokémon I have with me right now for training purposes, but Fearow and Raticate have also just evolved. Before I get a chance to bring them to me, I want to advise them on what to do training-wise while they're there with you. Would you mind getting them for me?" Professor Oak nodded right away. "Absolutely Ash, just give me a few minutes and I'll send them your way. Stand by." With that, he got up from his desk and left the line of sight. After a short time of waiting, Ash soon heard the sound of loud movement in the lab, followed quickly by the exited faces of all 5 of his Pokémon back home, filling up the video screen on the lab's end. "Hey guys, how you like it back there?" he asked with a smile into the small screen on his device. "Row row, Elia Rose, Mank Mank, Pidge Pidgeot, Rat Raticat." That was the chorus of unique replies he received from his Pokémon, who sounded more than a little happy to see him. With greetings dispensed, he got to the heart of his call. "Hey guys, listen up, I'm gonna have to keep Beedrill, Butterfree and Cleffa with me for a little bit so I can get them comfortable with their training regimens. Fearow and Raticate, I'd like you both to keep training as hard as you can until I can get you back here with me. I'll have to modify your own programs since you just recently evolved. Fortunately, Roselia and Pidgeotto didn't need any kind of modification to their own routines since he already had a chance to work with them after they evolved. And since Mankey hadn't evolved yet, he was also good to go. The flying and normal type both nodded to his request and then Ash directed his attention to Pidgeotto. Since you've already evolved once Pidgeotto, would you mind showing Firo your own routine? It won't be like the one I'll make for him but it'll help him get by for now. The second stage of Pidgey's evolution cooed in response. Pidge, Pidgeot Pidge. Hearing that and being pleased at his Pokémon's willingness to help one another, he looked at Raticate. And as for you Raticate, just double up on everything you're doing and push yourself as hard as you can. Got it? Ratty. The evolved form of Rattata chattered back in the affirmative. A short time later, Ash ended the chat with his Pokémon and said goodbye to them and Professor Oak. After he was done with that, he took his Pokéblock case out of his backpack and then went over to his Pokémon to dispense some out to them. Since he had all the different types his Pokémon preferred stored in just the one case, only in different compartments, it made it easy to keep track of them. Brock watched him give each of the different flavored and colored edible blocks to his Pokémon and then simply had to ask. Hey Ash, how do you have those Pokéblocks with you? Did you stop somewhere and make some before we met? Like the Pewter City contest hall maybe? The black-haired boy looked back and shook his head. Nah, it's actually pretty cool, let me show you guys. He then went back over to his pack and put the Pokéblock case away before digging into the largest pocket of the backpack. After a time he pulled a small, portable berry blender out of it that was relatively compact and travel-sized. The machine was blue with 4 buttons on the front that controlled the different blend settings. A big blue one, 2 little white ones and a slightly larger green one. Below the buttons was the tray, which dispensed the finished product, and on top of the small machine was a container with a lid, where the berries were placed into. It had sharp blades attached to the bottom, which would chop up and blend the berries, and there was also a measuring line on the side that helped keep track of exact measurements for ingredients. A little hole under the cup is what the blended berries fell into to be made into actual Pokéblocks, and since it was portable, the machine didn't have any wire plug-in. My mom got this for me, Ash started to explain. It's really small so it doesn't take up a lot of room. It looks a lot different than normal berry blenders and they even sell bigger sizes of this portable model, but mom got me the smallest they had for travel convenience. The coolest thing is though. He grinned and pointed at a small little battery pack on the side. You can run it on either battery packs or have an electric type Pokémon charge it for you. You and Misty wouldn't know about me using it because I normally go away to use it at night once you guys are sleeping. It can be a little noisy but it doesn't take long. I'll probably just try to start using it in the early evenings when we stop for the night. Brock appeared impressed by the small machine but Misty seemed distracted as she stared blankly into her soup bowl. Ash, seeing this, finally had enough and asked. All right Misty, what's up? She jumped a little at his voice and looked at him. What? Did you say something? He put a hand on his knee. Come on Misty, there's something up. You keep acting strange and I know it has something to do with Cerulean City. Now spill it. Brock also looked at her intently and she finally sighed after seeing that neither one appeared to be willing to let the matter drop. Thus, with a small frown, she hung her head. All right fine, I guess you'll both find out anyway before long. Taking a deep breath, she prepared herself and then began explaining. I actually come from Cerulean City. More than that, my family owns the Pokémon gym there. My sisters and I are actually the joint leaders. At this, her friend's eyes widened and she nodded. Yeah I know. I'm sorry I didn't tell you before. Ash remained quiet for a time before, finally, he spoke. But, I don't get it Misty, why didn't you just tell us about this earlier? Brock nodded. Yeah, did you think we were going to treat you differently or something? The orange-haired shook her head. No, it's just, well, I left under not the best circumstances. She sighed heavily again. My parents were the ones who opened the gym and ran it originally, but they died in a car crash when I was very little. My sisters are older than me, so they had to take over the duty of running the gym and looking after me. She then crossed her arms and huffed. Only they've really not done that great of a job at either. I basically had to raise myself, and then as soon as I was old enough to get my own Pokémon, I trained really hard to become certified as the 4th gym leader." She rolled her eyes. "My sisters only care about their looks and performing in these water show performances they put on at the gym. They battle and everything, but they mostly choose not to and just shove all the gym leader responsibilities onto me." Misty dropped her shoulders. "I decided to leave and go on a journey to become a water Pokémon master, but my sisters just don't understand me. That's why I've been so hesitant to go back there once Ash brought it up." The boy in question shook his head. "But Misty, it's not like you failed and are going back home to give up. You're just gonna be going back with us long enough for me to try and win my next gym badge. Tell your sisters that if you're afraid of getting jeered or something." Brock nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and besides, you'll have to go home sometime, Misty, so avoiding them just because you don't want them to tease you won't work, trust me. My family was broken for years just because my dad wouldn't face his mistakes and come look after us after our mom passed away." He raised a finger seriously. "Take it from me, family is the most important thing you have, and avoiding them just because of some differences is never the way to go." Ash looked at her. "He's right, Misty. I don't know why he never came back home, but I miss my dad every day, and I've never actually met him. Besides, you won't be going alone, we'll be with you." Brock nodded, and even Pikachu chirped comfortingly as he hopped into Misty's lap. She looked at the three of them and thought over their words before reaching down to pet Pikachu's fur and smiling. "Well, I guess I can at least give it a try. We'll only be there for a short time anyway, so I guess I can put up with it for a little while." Her two friends smiled reassuringly at her and reached out to pat her shoulders before returning to their meals. They were almost done eating, and as soon as they were finished, they were going to pack up and start out for their destination again. It was only an hour or two trek from where they currently were, and they intended to make it to the city with plenty of daylight to spare. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX the streets next to them. Cerulean City. Looking around, it was evident that Cerulean was a modestly sizable city. Cars sped up and down the many different streets, the sidewalks were well trodden by respectable numbers of people and the shops and stores scattered about the city were rather numerous. It wasn't nearly as large as metropolitan cities like Celadon or Saffron, but it was still reasonably grown up. The city itself was bordered by a large mountain range on one end of it, similar to the Mt. Moon mountain range they had just come from, and sprawling forests on another. There was also one area in particular, visible from where they had entered the city, that appeared to have a flowing body of water running through it. The relatively sizable channel in question did not go through the actual city but flowed outside of it, even beyond the housing suburbs. It seemed to wrap around the mountain range before eventually veering away from it, across through open country and off into what was most likely the ocean far off. Or even to Vermilion City first before reaching the sea. The bigger part of the city itself was where the commerce and shopping districts were found, and all of that was mostly isolated in the middle of Cerulean. The urban housing areas, on the other hand, could be found on the outlying edges of the city. Near but not next to the large channel of water, at least not for the most part. At present, Ash and his friends were somewhere between the two divisions, and it was at the point when they came to a three-way intersection in the street that he turned to his orange-headed friend. "So is there any way you can lead us to the gym?" His question had Misty sighing and dropping her shoulders. "Oh, I guess I can. It isn't far from here, the gym is located a little ways outside of the heart of the city." Brock hummed and put a hand to his chin. "I really have something I need to do while I'm here, I just remembered." Ash looked over at him and tilted his head. "Do you need to go do it now?" The older boy shook his head. "Nah, I'll be alright. Let's go and do your gym battle first, Ash, and then we'll go where I gotta stop by." With that decided, Misty took the lead and guided them through the streets of Cerulean City until they reached the outskirts of town, between the city and the suburbs. Eventually, they came within sight of a large and colorfully designed building, which she pointed to. "Well, that's it. The gym was situated in what looked like the atmosphere of a park. There were trees, bushes and shrubs all around the immediate vicinity, but they were neatly maintained and kept well trimmed. The road leading up to the building had a sign stuck in the grass which was designed with a water theme. The sign had the image of a dugong on it and read Cerulean City Pokémon Gym right at the bottom. The gym itself was quite large and had a rounded dome shape. From the appearance, it looked like there was a far bigger section of the gym at the back and another one on the opposite side from it that was just as large. The top of the gym's rooftop dome was colored in pinkish magenta and yellowish orange stripes. There were also 3 sets of double doors that lead into the gym with windows spaced in between them. White and blue spiral columns held up the front-facing section of the building where the doors were, and above that, stretched across the bottom of the domed roof, was a design of what looked like white waves. All out in front of the gym there were also light poles to help illuminate the area after dark. There was even a snow cone vendor set up nearby that was shaped like a lapras, of which a banner beside of it explained in detail what it sold. Though at the moment, the stand was closed. The most distinguishing feature of the gym itself, however, was the large dugong attached to the front of the dome with letters reading below it, scrawled onto the waves, Cerulean Gym. In some ways it was like a far larger version of the sign down on the ground. All in all, if one could summarize up the entire description, it was far more eye-catching and noticeable than the Pewter City Gym. Interestingly enough, there were 3 men standing outside of the doors who were dressed in what seemed like red shirt and black pants usher uniforms. Seeing this, Misty sighed and shook her head. "Well, you won't be getting a battle with my sisters today, Ash." "Not that I'm surprised." He looked at her. "Huh, why not?" She started walking toward the gym. "Because those 3 guys are the ushers who watch the doors and monitor who all comes in when my sisters are doing one of their water shows." Soon, they reached the set of double doors that were in the very center, and upon seeing them, one of the 3 ushers with brown hair held his hand out. "Sorry kids, I can't let you in, the show is already about to start and we've closed the doors." However, Misty stepped forward and waved him off. "It's okay Ralph, it's just me." She then thumbed back at Ash and Brock. "They're my friends." The man had a look of recognition pass across his face before he smiled and nodded to her. "Oh, Misty. Wow, it is you, sorry about that, I wasn't paying attention there at first." "Since it's you, of course, please go right on in, it is your gym after all." He then stepped aside and opened the left door for them. Smiling, she nodded to him in gratitude and then walked inside with her friends following. As soon as they stepped into the building, Ash looked around and saw that they were in a large lobby now. While not full of people at the present moment, it was quite clear that the area was more than large enough to hold a sizable crowd of people when they were either coming into the gym or leaving. The walls were all painted a faint vanilla cream on the bottom and light blue on the top, with water-themed designs painted into the middle between both color schemes. There were a few different sitting areas off to the opposite sides of the lobby, and the furniture mostly comprised of chairs, sofas and a few 2-seaters. Pictures and paintings of various designs, mostly water-themed and of aquatic Pokémon, also hung from the walls. There were coffee tables set up in the middle of the sitting areas and smaller tables on the sides of the sofas. Magazines lay neatly placed on the tables, and there were even a few vending machines on one wall. Altogether there were 3 lounge areas, 2 to the left of the lobby and 1 to the right. Each one had its own wall-mounted TV. There was a big front desk further into the lobby, up against the right wall, where 2 women were sitting behind computers typing away. Beyond the desk was a set of large double doors, and in front of it was a single door with the symbol for a janitor's closet next to it. Also, right next to the front desk was a big open archway that led into a huge hallway beyond. Walking up to the front desk, Misty addressed the woman sitting closest to them. "Hey Janice, are my sisters going on yet?" The red-bloused, purple bun-haired woman looked up from her computer and saw the younger girl standing there. Smiling, she greeted kindly. "Hello Misty, nice to see you back." "And no, not yet." She turned and looked at the wall clock behind her. The stands just filled up with people who took their seats only a few minutes ago. "Your sisters should be going on before too long." Well, we're gonna go ahead and head in so I can let my friends see what it's like, Misty informed as she went to step away from the counter. Alright, well, it's nice to see you back, Misty, and have a good day. The woman wished as she went back to her work on the computer. After that, Misty led Ash and Brock through the archway and into the long hall next to the front desk. The hallway was long and on both sides were wall-length aquariums extending down the entire stretch of the long hall. There were lights lining the ceiling, the walls that the aquariums were set into were yellow and the floors were made of finely polished black marble. Looking at the aquariums, Ash saw that they had many different types of water Pokémon in them. Goldeen, Seeking, Horsey, Magikarp, Shelder, Cloyster and several others. The theme itself depicted a very detailed and eye-catching scene of life under the sea. Complete with underwater rocks, seaweed, coral and other natural aquatic foliage that grew and could be found beneath the waves of the world. Wow, that's a lot of Pokémon, Ash commented as he looked at the aquariums. Yeah, are these Pokémon all the ones you use in gym matches? Brock asked. She shook her head. No, those are all Pokémon we just take care of for the aquariums, some being rescues that were brought to live here. They aren't trained to battle though, they're only for the attraction when people come to see the water shows. Me and my sisters have our own Pokémon that we use to battle and work with. They eventually reached the end of the hallway and came to a large glass door that was opaque so nothing could be seen beyond it. There was a keypad next to the door and Misty input what must have been the unlock code. The door slid open and after she led them inside, Ash and Brock saw a small-sized stadium laid out before them, which was currently packed full of people. There was a huge pool in the middle of the arena with an exceedingly tall diving board at the far end. On both sides of the stadium there were rows upon rows of bleachers and seats that the large crowd of people were filling. At the far end of the arena the wall was painted with big designs of water Pokémon like Seadra, and the pool itself was raised high above ground, almost as if it were a gigantic aquarium. Indeed, the four walls of the pool were clear glass, which allowed everyone to see inside at the sea-themed atmosphere that the bottom was decorated to resemble. There were even a few water-type Pokémon at the bottom of the tank. Come on guys, Misty gestured for her friends to follow her. We can watch from up in the stands over here. She then led them across the small stadium and up to a section of the bleachers that had a few empty spaces. After climbing up into the box and taking their seats, the lights in the room grew dim and a deep male voice spoke from over the intercom system. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to welcome you to the Cerulean City Water Show Arena. Tonight's show is brought to you courtesy of 3 of the city's finest and most talented young women. They are not only aquatic performers but also the leaders of this very same gym. Please give a round of applause for the beautiful, the graceful and the ravishing Sensational Sisters. A spotlight suddenly shone atop the diving board high above the pool and when it did, 3 young women were now standing on its surface. The first one had long, slightly curly blonde hair with a pink daisy flower in it and was wearing a short, frilly red swimsuit, which looked more like a nightgown, and stopped at the top of her thighs. The second girl had long violet hair of a similar style and her outfit was the same, only in green. Lastly, the final sister had long, reddish-pink hair that came down in 2 strips beside her face and was wearing a burnt orange swimsuit with a blue ribbon on the chest. In turn, the announcer introduced each young woman that the spotlights were shining upon. Introducing first, the dazzling, the daring and the darling Daisy. The leggy blonde on the diving board smiled and waved to all the cheering people while the announcer spoke again. Next up, the vivacious, vexing, vixen Violet. The blue-haired beauty next to Daisy stepped forward to wave at the crowd as well while the redhead on the other side enjoyed her own introduction. Last but certainly not least, the lively, lustrous and lovely Lily. As the final young woman stepped forward to bask in the crowd's adoration, Misty crossed her arms and rolled her eyes. Ash saw this but he didn't have time to ask about it since the 3 female aquatic performers suddenly jumped from the diving board and down into the pool with perfect timing and flawless swan dives. Seconds later they re-emerged from the clear water but did so with a pose that had their arms extended straight into the air. Then, after performing a few lithe and graceful movements above water, the three of them dove down and demonstrated impressive underwater mobility by kicking their legs straight up out of the water. The crowd watched in enraptured fascination as the Sensational Sisters kicked their legs in time with one another, moving them through a variety of different positions before dipping gracefully under the water again. The melodious ballet music playing over the loudspeakers in the arena filled the air and gave ambience to the atmosphere as Daisy, Lily and Violet clipped underwater breathers to their mouths and then swam down to join the Pokémon that were closer to the bottom. Daisy went up to a seal, Lily chose a cloyster and Violet selected a tentacruel. Then, in a routine that had clearly been practiced with the three water types, Misty's sisters began performing a whole new routine that involved moving in time with the Pokémon they were holding onto. Around and around the massive underwater tank they swam, gracefully moving, spinning, turning and shadowing their Pokémon partners as they went from one side of the pool to the other. At certain points, they would even stop and call out attacks from the Pokémon, which was executed to stunning effect for the pleasure of the viewing audience. Daisy called out for Seal to use Aurora Beam and Violet had Tentacruel use Aqua Ring so as to make a circular target for the multicolored beam to pass through. Likewise, Lily had Cloyster use Spike Cannon to create a dazzling underwater twister of glowing spikes around her as she spun and pirouetted in place without a single one touching her. This, quite naturally, had the crowd applauding uproariously. "Wow, your sisters are awesome, Misty!" Ash exclaimed with excitement as he and an equally captivated Pikachu watched the show unfold before them. Brock, who was mysteriously red-faced and nearly seemed to be drooling at the mouth, nodded rapidly. Yeah, they're awesome. Totally awesome sisters." The orange-haired girl crossed her arms and shrugged. Well, they're annoying as heck to me, but a small smile came over her lips. "I'll give them credit for one thing, they are good at putting on their shows. Lazy at everything else but good at these." For the next several minutes they watched her sisters continue to dance and swim through the translucent pool in perfect time with the music and with their Pokémon. This, however, made Ash curious and he leaned over to ask just as Daisy, on Seal, swam through a circuit of rings that Violet's Tentacruel had created using Aqua Ring. All while Cloyster and Lily spun together like a top, she standing upon the former. "How do your sisters hear the music underwater?" His question prompted Misty to reply while pointing. "They wear waterproof earpieces that allows them to hear it." He nodded in understanding just as the climax of the show arrived. The trio of Pokémon took off rocketing up to the surface and as soon as they broke the plane, all three girls riding them were launched skyward into the air. However, in perfect timing and sync, they clasped their hands together and then fell back to the water while spinning in circles, like a flower petal tossed by the wind. When they finally hit the water and sunk beneath the surface again, everyone held their breaths in anticipation. Then, at the closing of the last song, the three beauties emerged once more while standing yet again upon their respective Pokémon. Their arms were extended to the air in a striking, elegant pose and as they waved to the crowd, the entire arena erupted into loud applause and cheers. "And that's it, ladies and gentlemen," the announcer yelled over the intercom again. "Please give a loud uproar of applause for the sizzling Sensational Sisters." As everyone stood while wildly clapping and cheering, Ash smiled and got to his feet along with Brock and Misty so that he could clap too. "Man, that show was awesome." He looked up at Pikachu, whom had leapt back onto his trainer's shoulder. "What do you think, Pi? Did you like it?" The small little electric type smiled up at him and held out a tiny little thumb. "Pikachu Pi." At that, Misty tapped Ash's shoulder and then spoke to both he and Brock. "Hey, let's head back to the dressing area, we'll be able to meet up with my sisters there." With that, she started walking out of the bleachers with her two friends in tow. Once they were down on the floor, she led them around the elevated seating platform and toward a door that was all the way at the back wall. There was yet another keypad beside it that she had to input the combination for and then once it was unlocked, she opened the door and they walked into a long hallway that went in two directions. Misty led her friends down the right direction and after a few seconds they came to another door at the far end of the hall. There was a plaque attached to the wooden surface that read dressing room and when she opened the door and allowed them inside, both boys found themselves stunned at the sight of all the rows upon rows of clothes and costumes hanging up on racks. There were also 3 beauty stations at one end of the wall with big mirrors lined with lights framing them. Wow, talk about a lot of clothes. Ash spoke in awe as he looked all around the dressing room. She sighed and dipped her shoulders. Yeah, my sisters have a major clothing obsession, and a makeup obsession. And an obsession with pretty much anything to do with beauty or style. Brock walked over to one of the racks and, with a goofy, blushing smile on his face, he leaned toward one of the outfits hanging up while looking back at Misty. So your beautiful sisters have worn all these clothes? She quirked an eyebrow at the strange question. Yeah, why? Almost immediately he leaned all the way in and took a deep inhale of the silky cloth material, causing Ash to blink widely at the sight and Misty to scrunch her face up. What are you, some kind of a freak? She questioned in disgust as he finished smelling the garment and turned around to raise a finger astutely into the air. By no means. I'm just a guy who appreciates the scent of fine feminine fabrics. Neither of the other two seemed at all convinced by his words, but at that moment, a door at the far end of the dressing room opened and in came all 3 of Misty's elder sisters. Like you were so good today, Daisy. Lily complimented with an airy gesture of the hand. You and Seal were totally on time with those aurora beams. The slender blonde beauty eye smiled in reply and held up a finger. Yeah, but you and Cloister were great with the way you used spike cannon, just like we practiced. She then looked at Violet. And you and Tentacruel were totally in sync when you used those water rings. The dark-haired beauty giggled. Yeah, but you looked so pretty and totally graceful when you went surfing through them on Seal's back. Lily gave her own girlish giggle. Let's just agree that we were all totally awesome. I think we had all the guys in the crowd practically drooling over us. All 3 erupted into a fit of amused, self-indulgent giggles but stopped when they saw Misty standing near the costume racks with Ash and Brock. Huh. Daisy stopped and blinked in surprise, mimicked by Lily and Violet. Misty, is that you? The orange-haired girl put her hands on her hips and gave a hard stare at her sisters. Yeah, it's me. The 3 older females all seemed to smirk and cross their arms at the same time while Lily taunted. Well, we told you that you'd be back in no time at all. Violet snickered behind her hand. Did you find that traveling on your own wasn't as easy as you thought it'd be? Misty's face reddened with anger as she snapped back, no. For your information, I only came back so my friend could challenge one of you 3 to a gym battle. Her sisters had their attention directed to Ash, whom she gestured at, but before they could say anything, Brock had somehow closed the distance between them in a flash. Then, going from each one in turn, he clasped their hands in his and said in a tone which was a cross between lovestruck and outright silly. Oh Daisy, Violet, Lily. He then knelt down on one knee, a hand over his heart, and held the other out to them. When I came, I never thought that I would see 3 beauties that were more gorgeous than the flowers they were named after. Now faced before me is the impossible choice of picking between which of you I should make my own when all 3 of you have already stolen my heart. The 3 different hair-colored women just stared down at him and blinked several times while Ash and Misty sweat dropped at their friend's unexpectedly untoward actions. Even Pikachu appeared confused and perhaps even a little disturbed at what he was seeing. Finally though, Daisy and the other 2 contorted their faces for just a moment before erupting into all-out laughter. Lily gasped in between fits of mirth. That's the funniest thing I've heard all day. Violet held her belly and nodded. Totally. That was so cheesy. Daisy, controlling herself the most, though not by much, wiped a tear away from under her eye and then waved her hand in a dismissive gesture. Sorry, but we don't date guys who say such cheesy pick-up lines. At that, Brock lunged back like a bucket of cold water had been poured over him. Then, with a palpable aura of depressive failure around him, he crouched down next to a nearby rack of costumes and groaned miserably, one finger twirling back and forth across the floor. So anyway. Daisy turned her attention back to her little sister. These 2 are your friends? Misty nodded resolutely. Yes, I'm traveling with them. This one is Brock, She gestured at the still pouting teen before pointing at her other friend. And this is Ash, he's the one who wants to challenge you. The black-haired boy in question stepped forward and smiled at the three older girls with his hands in his tracksuit pockets. Hey, it's nice to meet Misty's older sisters. We watched your show and it was really awesome. Lily smiled and replied in a chirpy tone. Like, thanks. Always nice to meet someone who loves our shows. Violet nodded. Totally. We work really hard on them, so it's nice to hear people like them. Misty rolled her eyes and muttered to the side. About the only thing you three work hard on. At that, Ash gestured to himself. I'm from Pallet Town and I met Misty shortly after I left home on my journey. We've been traveling together ever since. Brock is the former gym leader of Pewter City and this, he smiled up at Pikachu, is my buddy Pikachu. He was my first Pokémon that Professor Oak gave me. The little electric mouse in question held up his paw in greeting and voiced his own greeting. Pikachu. Aw, it's so cute. Lily gushed along with Violet as they both rushed over to crowd around the friendly and adorable little electric type. Daisy put her hands on her hips and looked from Ash to her youngest sister. So you're traveling around with him, huh? He's pretty cute for his age. Is he your boyfriend or something? She teased with a wink while holding up her pinky finger. This made Misty turn bright red as Lily and Violet both joined in on the teasing by making mushy, ooh sounds. Furiously, she shook her head and then balled up her fists angrily. No, he is not my boyfriend. I'll have you know that we met when he saved me from a Gyarados. Her sisters went wide-eyed and gasped collectively upon hearing this. All jokes and jabbing aside, their concern as older sisters came to the forefront as they began speaking together urgently. Misty, no way. Are you okay? Did it hurt you? The Oranguette shook her head in the negative. No, Ash and Pikachu came along and chased it off before that could happen. She then grumbled in a low mixture of irritation and shame. But it did destroy my bike. To her surprise, when her sisters reacted, it wasn't how she expected. Well, who cares about that? Violet spoke as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Yeah, that doesn't mean anything compared to what could have happened to you, Misty. Lily agreed. Daisy stepped forward and looked down at her sister. Look, Misty, for all the annoying, bratty and irritating things about you, you're still our baby sister. A bike is so totally replaceable, you're not. I mean duh. Misty's head whipped up and she looked at her vain, fashion-loving sisters in shock. While said in their own maddeningly grating verbal tick, they were nonetheless showing genuine concern for her well-being, and that did touch her. With a small smile, she replied in less of an aggressive tone. Well, thanks you three, for understanding. That means a lot to me. At that, Daisy turned to Ash and crossed her arms under her bust. And Ash, I just really wanna thank you for saving our little sister. Seriously. Violet and Lily nodded quickly in agreement as the blonde gestured at their youngest sister. I mean when Misty went running off yelling about becoming a water Pokémon master, we were so totally worried about her. I mean, from traveling with her for just a short time that she's just totally helpless. The fluffy moment was gone and the anger returned as Misty shot back. Hey, though she was unable to get anything else out as Daisy went on. But hearing how you and your super brave Pikachu here took on a Gyarados to save her. She reached out and rubbed Pikachu between the ears, which made him give a happy chirp in reply. Well, that's just awesome and so incredibly heroic. Violet and Lily both nodded again. Totally. Daisy then held up her finger. Listen, for helping look after our baby sister, I'd totally have a battle with you, but the thing is. She smiled apologetically. We've been up since really early this morning preparing for today's show. Violet sighed. Yeah, I mean, it may be hard to believe, but it takes a while to look this so totally beautiful. Lily gestured at the swimsuit she was still wearing. And to rehearse our routine a time or two with the Pokémon. It's a major drag on time. Daisy finished. So you see, we're really kind of tired right now. If you'd be interested, how would you feel about, having our battle tomorrow? Violet smiled and thumbed at herself. Yeah, and then you can pick which one of us you wanna battle. Ash looked between them for a moment before shrugging. Sure, I don't see why not. I wanna have a good battle anyway, and I know you can't do that tired. He then looked back at Misty and Brock, who had since stopped pouting and rejoined them. Got any ideas what we can do here until tomorrow though? Lily spoke up with a smile. Hey, I know. Why don't you guys visit the Cape? He looked back at her and questioned. The Cape? Violet nodded. Yeah, the Cerulean Cape. It's this super nice, really romantic spot to the north of the city. It meets at a point where the Cerulean River flows around the Cerulean Mountain and down south to Vermilion Bay before meeting the ocean. Daisy clasped her hands together and sighed. The Cape has a really nice little restaurant with totally delicious food and the most awesome gift shop. Lily chimed in eagerly. Ooh, and the outdoor seating area is at a high enough elevation that you can see almost all of Cerulean City and even off in the distance toward Vermilion. Misty turned to her friend and smiled. There's also the Battle Bridge, which you'd probably like, Ash. It's the bridge that leads from the outskirts of town and across the river up to the Cape. It's well known for Pokémon trainers meeting up there to battle on it. The black-haired boy shrugged. Why not? We can't battle until tomorrow, so let's go sightseeing. If we can get a little practice at this bridge, all the better. Daisy interjected the conversation at that point. And hey, once you guys are done, you can come back here and stay for the night. Feel free. Ash looked at her and nodded. Thanks, Daisy, I appreciate that. He then held up a hand and asked a question that had been on his mind. Oh, and out of curiosity, those Pokémon you performed with earlier, do you battle with them too? The dirty blonde-haired beauty shrugged. Well, I do with my seal, but Lils and V don't. Violet put her hands on her hips. Yet Tentacruel is only trained to perform in the shows, not battle. Lily then chimed in after her. Same deal with Cloyster. Daisy finished the explanation for her sisters by saying, we've got a few Pokémon we perform shows with, but they aren't trained to battle. Seal is the only exception, he can do both. We have other Pokémon we've trained to just do gym battling. Lily smiled and made an offhanded hand gesture. When we do gym battles, we usually either let the challenger pick which of us they want to battle, or we, choose among ourselves if they don't care. If all three of us are here and stuff at the same time, of course. Violet crossed her arms under her bust. Since we're so close and have raised our Pokémon that we battle with together, they'll listen to any of the three of us. So if the battle is a 2 or 3 on 3, we'll just lend our Pokémon to whichever of us are battling. Easy. Daisy nodded. We've got a couple of Pokémon that we do our water shows with, but only one apiece that we battle with. Which is why we share and stuff. While he found it exceedingly odd that the three beautiful young women didn't just train more of their Pokémon to battle instead of sharing with each other, Ash felt it best not to say anything as he turned back to his friends and asked. So anyway, you guys wanna head to the Cape then? Sure. It's been a while since I've been there, Misty agreed. Fine by me, a rather rapidly rebounded Brock spoke. Which had his friends raising their eyebrows at his speedy emotional recovery from such a harsh rejection. I can do what I need to do any time while we're here. Ash looked up at Pikachu on his shoulder and smirked. You ready to go get a little battle practice in, buddy? The small but spunky electric type held up his fist and nodded eagerly. Pikachu pie. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX themselves trekking into the outskirts of Cerulean. The walk from the gym to where they were now only took about 15 minutes, and at present, the busy city streets had been traded in for quiet, rural terrain. As they walked along the road that was gradually taking them northward to the cape, Ash spotted something ahead and pointed. "Hey, is that the bridge, Misty?" Looking into the near distance, she saw that he was pointing to a long, high and well-built bridge which was stretching out over a wide, deep and slow-moving river. "Yep," she nodded in confirmation. "That's the battle bridge." Soon enough they came upon the entrance to the bridge, but almost immediately, they were approached by a young kid who was wearing a green and white shirt, an identical sun hat, blue shorts and green sneakers. He also had a red pouch strapped to the back of his shorts and a bug-catching net attached to his back. "Hey, you there," the kid called out while pointing. "Are any one of you three a Pokémon trainer?" Ash and the other two looked among each other, but he was the one who answered. "I am, my name's Ash." "Why?" The boy smirked and pulled a Pokeball out from his shorts. "Well, this is the battle bridge and trainers love to come out here to challenge each other. You had to have known about that, right?" He thumbed over his shoulder at the long bridge, which had a few people standing on it, stretching all the way to the end. Since the bridge was so wide, long and sturdy looking, it provided enough room and fortitude for a Pokémon battle. Though at present, no one was battling. "This is the way it usually works," the kid explained. "A bunch of us meet up on the bridge and whoever is at the start of it challenges any trainer that comes along. If they win, we send them farther up the bridge until they make it to the other side. Easy and simple. You don't gotta battle if you're just heading to the Cape, but regardless," he swiped under his nose. "Hey, it makes great practice." Ash looked out onto the bridge. "How many trainers are here today?" The boy put a hand on his hip. "Including me, 5. My name is Kale and I love catching bug types. So what do you say, wanna do it?" Ash gave a small smirk himself and nodded. "Sure, that's one reason I came this way in the first place." As the two boys prepared to begin their battle, Brock looked at Misty and asked, "I'm surprised the city allowed the only bridge connecting it to the Cape to be turned into a battleground for trainers." She shrugged. "There's another road to the Cape and it's used by people who either aren't trainers or the ones who aren't worried about battling. I could have taken us that way, but I figured Ash would want to battle." A short time later, the pallet trainer in question and Kale were facing off on opposite sides of the grass, just outside of the bridge. Brock was acting as referee, and having decided who would go first, Kale enlarged the Pokeball he held in his hand. "All right." Smiling, he reared back. "Let's do this. Go Venonat." As the ball burst open and the small purple and red-eyed insect appeared on the bright green grass, Ash smirked. "All right, let's fight fire with fire here." Pulling and enlarging a Pokeball of his own from his belt, the boy tossed it skyward and it snapped open to release none other than Butterfree from within its pocket-dimensional confines. Free. Free free. Looking graceful and ready for action, the flying bug type fluttered down and stood on the ground, prepared and waiting for his trainer's command to battle. "Let this one-on-one Pokémon match begin," Brock announced as he lifted both arms up. "Come on Venonat." Kale started off quickly. "Let's get an easy win here over that Butterfree. Use Psybeam." As the two beams of psychic-type energy came shooting from Venonat's eyes toward the grounded Butterfree, Ash simply crossed his arms and remained calm. "Butterfree, you know what I've been training you to do since you were a Caterpie." Butterfree nodded but remained still right up until the twin beams of psychic energy were upon it. Then, in an impressive display of speed and agility, he took to the air and flew off to the side and away from danger. As Venonat's attack failed and missed its mark by a long shot, Kale blinked at the speed Butterfree displayed before shaking his head and pointing. "That's okay, use Psybeam again until you hit it." The land-bound bug type started to use a continuous wave of Psybeam attacks on Butterfree, but Ash's Pokémon proved quickly that he was far faster and marginally more agile than anticipated. This was proven in the way that he was able to rapidly flit this way and that across the sky to avoid, with ease, each psychic beam that came his way. After several bursts of the brightly colored energy had been fired, to no avail, Kale became frustrated. "Let's slow that Butterfree down. Use Confusion." However, just before the pre-evolved form of Venomoth could do as it had been commanded, Ash finally spoke. "Butterfree, use Whirlwind." Stopping in mid-flight, Butterfree began flapping his wings at a rapid speed and quickly churned up a powerful gust of wind that blew through the area and headed straight for Venonat. The windy gale proved too powerful and thus, Kale's Pokémon was sent flying off of its feet and back through the air some distance. Before it could land though, Butterfree took off like a streak and closed the gap between them in mere seconds. Without Ash needing to give a single command, he swiftly smashed himself into Venonat while it was in the air with a hard, solid tackle. This sent the purple-furred insect soaring even farther and higher into the air while Kale yelled after it, "Venonat." Ash kept their momentum going by calling out, "Butterfree, get up above it and then use Gust." Free. Demonstrating an impressive grasp on his ability of flight so soon after evolving, Butterfree shot up into the air like he was really a bird and not an insect. Getting ahead of Venonat's ascent rather quickly, Butterfree turned himself downward and started flapping his wings again. This time the action whipped up an actual gust of wind that abruptly halted Venonat's upward ascent and reversed it into a rapid downward one. At speeds far faster than it had went up, the airborne bug type flew straight down toward the earth and slammed into the ground with enough force that a cloud of dust was sent up like a plume. Butterfree flew back down and hovered in front of Ash while the dust cleared and revealed Venonat to be laying in the grass with swirls in its eyes. Kale stared, mouth agape, while Brock raised his arm and pointed. Venonat is unable to battle. The victory for this match goes to Ash and Butterfree. As his Pokémon flew over to him, Ash smiled and congratulated Butterfree, along with Pikachu, while Kale returned his defeated Pokémon and walked up to his victorious opponent. "That was a great battle, Ash," he complimented with a smile. "You two were totally in sync." The bug catcher looked at the flying insect now perched on Ash's shoulder and nodded appraising ly. "I've never seen a Butterfree as strong as yours before, you must have been training with it for a long time. Me and Venonat have been together for a while but you two beat us in no time." "Well, actually." The messy-haired boy looked up at his fully evolved Pokémon and smiled. "We haven't been together too terribly long. And Butterfree just evolved yesterday in Mt. Moon. We just trained hard and I spent a while this morning making sure he knew how to properly use his new wings." The other boy adopted an expression that showed his surprise. "Are you serious? Wow, you must train your Pokémon really hard if that's the case." "Well then," he pointed toward the bridge. "Go on ahead, Ash. There are 4 other trainers waiting to challenge you. Good luck." After saying his parting farewell with the bug-type enthusiast, Ash and his friends finally made their way out onto the bridge and prepared to take on the challenges that awaited. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX 4 trainers that were on Battle Bridge. In order there had been Allie, a schoolgirl wearing a white blouse and green skirt who battled with a Psyduck. He fought with Beedrill and, since the evolved bug type possessed an aggressive nature and impressive attack power, especially now, he was able to handily defeat the more placid water type. The next opponent was a young boy named Timmy, who dressed in a white and yellow shirt, tan shorts and a blue cap which was turned around backwards. He had a Sandshrew that Ash took on with Nidorino. While Sandshrew had been a harder opponent than Venonat or Psyduck, mostly because of its penchant to continuously use defense curl and roll away, Nidorino possessed greater attack power and brute force, which usually turned out to be an advantage Ash's Pokémon nearly always enjoyed due to their training routines. Because of this, the battle had only lasted a short 2 minutes by Brock's time. Afterward, Ash faced another schoolgirl who was dressed in a similar manner as Allie. Her name was Reely and apparently, both brunettes were sisters. She battled with, of all things, a Meowth. Ash had decided to go with Nidorina and the choice proved wise since the battle ended up being incredibly short and uneventful. Reely's Meowth was somewhat quick but it lacked attack power and it had absolutely no defense. Therefore, Nidorina, whom possessed adequate levels of all 3, had been able to easily clinch the victory. The last trainer was a boy named Kevin, who was camping in the area. He wore an all-green outfit, complete with hat, along with long black socks and shoes. His Pokémon had been a Growlithe. The last match would have been more exciting potentially, had Ash used a different Pokémon, but as it was, he went with Pikachu. The unequaled speed, surprising attack force and crippling electrical power he wielded enabled him to easily defeat the puppy Pokémon. To be more accurate, Growlithe had barely been able to use a growl attack, followed by Ember, before Pikachu confused it into dizziness with agility. After running around it about a dozen times in only a matter of 10 or 15 seconds, Pikachu stunned the fire type with a punishing full-body quick attack. He then swiftly finished the short battle using a single thunderbolt. Suffice to say, by the time they finally reached the end of the battle bridge, none of Ash's team were the least bit exhausted, let alone hurt or injured. That was a fortunate thing though, since they had only been walking on the road leading from the bridge for a short time before a man wearing a long black trench coat, dark pants and a hat stepped out from behind a tree and stood in their way. "So you made it across the bridge, The mysterious stranger spoke in a smooth, deep tone. His appearance and unusual demeanor made all three of them cautious as Ash replied carefully. "Yeah, so, can we help you?" He ended that question on more of a statement than anything, since something about the man struck him as odd. The stranger smirked. "Yeah, I've got an offer for you. How you'd like to be rich?" The three kids looked at one another and shared an equally disbelieving glance before Ash looked back at the probable conman and replied, "Rich how?" Smirking still, he reached into his trench coat and then pulled out, from an inner pocket, a small golden rock that was totally smooth and spherical. "I'm talking about this. It's called a nugget and it can be yours for the small price of only 1,000 credits. This baby will sell in return for a couple million." This only further cemented the doubt in their minds and solidified that the man before them was most likely a shady dealer. Nonetheless, they all played along for curiosity's sake if nothing else. "Oh yeah?" Misty questioned. "If that's true, then why are you selling them so cheap?" The man looked her way. "Simple little lady. I've recently come into some good fortune and found these things in abundance in a secret location. Only a few set me up for life and now I'm trying to share the wealth, so to speak. Well, for a price that is." He then tossed it into the air before catching it again. "So, what do you say? Interested?" Ash stepped forward. "Maybe. Can I take a look first?" The man held the hand out that was holding the nugget and Ash leaned forward to get a closer look. Pikachu, at the same time, also did the same from his trainer's shoulder, but he sniffed the golden rock. After a few inhales, something offensive assaulted the electric mouse's sensitive nose and he pulled his head back with a jerk, shaking it and vocalizing his displeasure. "Pika." Immediately following that, he spun around on Ash's shoulder with his tail now glowing like steel and scraped it across the rock's surface. This caused a small scratch to go straight through the nugget and reveal what looked like silver underneath of it. The man stumbled back when this happened and jostled to keep hold of the fake golden rock while Misty pointed. "Aha! I knew it. That isn't a real gold nugget. That's just a normal old silver rock that's been gold-plated." Ash narrowed his eyes at the man. "All right, just who are you? Some loser trying to pawn off fake crap onto gullible travelers?" Knowing he was caught, the shady con growled and stepped a few paces back while tossing the rock to the ground. "Blasted kids." He then removed his trench coat and threw it away, revealing that underneath he was wearing the same Team Rocket uniform that the ones in Mt. Moon had worn. Team Rocket. All three kids gasped together at the surprising revelation. The man, now sneering at them, laughed villainously and reached onto his belt where a few Pokeballs were clipped. "You might have caught my nugget scheme, but Team Rocket will still have your Pokémon as a consolation prize." He then enlarged and threw both balls, releasing from them a Zubat and a coughing. "Now why don't you just hand them over or I'll have to take them?" He cackled again and crossed his arms. Ash looked at Pikachu and nodded as the small electric type leapt down from his shoulder and sparked his cheeks. "Actually, I'll give you a chance to walk away now before it gets nasty." The grunt made a snorting sound of derision and carelessly refused the warning. "Stupid kid, you'll see what happens when you try to stand against Team Rocket." He then commanded his Pokémon to attack, but just as Zubat and Coughing prepared to strike, Ash commanded his Pokémon Pikachu use a high-voltage thunderbolt. In only seconds, the Palette native starter sparked his cheeks and glowed yellow for just the briefest of moments before unleashing a strong bolt of thunder that struck not only the grunt's Pokémon but the man himself. It only took a short period of time for the punishing electrical attack to take effect, and by the time it ended, Coughing and Zubat, as well as their deadbeat trainer, dropped to the ground, singed and charred like a badly burned pancake. "Good job, Pi," Ash complimented as his first partner gave a self-satisfied smirk at the look of the comically twitching and drooling rocket grunt laying sprawled on the ground. Looks like you weren't so tough after all, huh, jerk. Misty taunted as she walked up and kicked the unconscious man's left boot. All he did though was groan miserably with the whites of his eyes showing rolled up in his head. Guys, we should probably call the cops, Brock suggested as he walked up as well and looked down at the coughing and Zubat laying next to the grunt. And maybe Nurse Joy too, these guys look like they could use some healing after taking that powerful thunderbolt. Ash nodded in agreement and lifted his extransceiver up to his face. I'm on it, I'll find the number for the Cerulean police station first. Misty turned around to her friend. Oh, here, let me help, Ash, I know it. With that, they called the police station in the city and left their report. In no time at all, if barely 10 or 15 minutes had passed, the sirens of a police car could be heard. The three traveling trainers looked up from their place next to the still unconscious rocket grunt and saw the police vehicle roaring toward them from farther up the road, wailing up a storm all the while. When the car finally stopped and the door opened, Officer Jenny climbed out and hurried over while out of the passenger side. Nurse Joy did the same. Okay, so what's going on? The female officer demanded as she ran up to them with the nurse in tow. I got a call about someone catching a Team Rocket agent. There was no chance or opportunity for anyone to do or say anything though, because at that moment, Brock leapt forward with hearts in his eyes and clasped his hands up against his cheek. Officer Jenny, Nurse Joy, I don't think my heart can take seeing two beautiful women such as yourselves in one day. It's simply too much for a mortal man such as I. Nurse Joy blinked and sweat dropped, along with Ash and Misty, both of them wondering for the second time that day just what was wrong with their friend. Officer Jenny, however, wasn't amused and simply shoved him away with a hand to his face. Now's not the time for silly nonsense. As the once more heartbroken young man fell to the ground with a cry of woeful despair, she turned to Ash and Misty. So, who made the call? She then looked down and saw the grunt laying at their feet and narrowed her eyes. And this is the suspect, I take it? The dark-haired boy nodded. Yes, it is, and I was the one who called, officer. He then went on to explain to her everything that had occurred, eventually ending by holding up the fake golden rock that he had Pikachu fetch for him earlier. This is the painted rock that he was calling a golden nugget, he informed while holding up the spherical stone to her. Jenny took it and examined the rock crucially for a few moments before looking down at the unconscious grunt. I don't think you kids realize just what you did here. She then looked back at them and put a hand on her hip. This man has been spotted from Cerulean to Vermilion City selling these fake nuggets to unsuspecting travelers and Pokémon trainers. Myself and my sister in Vermilion have been looking for him for some time now, but he's always managed to slip away. I just had no idea and would never have imagined that he was a member of Team Rocket. She put the rock away into a large pack she was carrying on her side and then saluted the kids while smiling. You performed a great civil service and I thank you for it on behalf of the whole city. Joy hurried over and knelt down to examine Coughing and Zubat. These two seem to be alright, but I'll take them back to the Pokémon Center with me and give them a nice long checkup. Jenny took the liberty of removing the Pokeballs from the grunt's belt and passed them to the pink-haired nurse, who returned both of them to their respective balls before standing and smiling at the kids as well. Yes, I should thank you as well. I don't like the thought of any Pokémon being forced to serve such wicked trainers as the members of Team Rocket. So to have the opportunity to give these two Pokémon another chance at life is a great relief to me. Ash smiled modestly in return and shrugged. You're welcome, Nurse Joy, Officer Jenny. I'm just glad we could help and do something to bring a member of Team Rocket down. Right, Pikachu? He asked his Pokémon, whom looked at him and smiled happily while nodding. Pikachu, pie Pikachu. Jenny knelt down, rolled the man over and put his arms behind his back before reaching for the cuffs she kept clipped to her side. Well, I won't forget what you kids did here, you can be rest assured of that. She then stood up and looked at them again. I just hope he didn't cause your Pokémon too much harm